Hello gang, welcome to the final video in this Art 233 Flash animation course. We're going to tie this whole animation up with creating a replay button that's going to be placed at the very end of this animation. So when the viewers have finished watching it, they can, with the click of a button, replay the whole animation. To do this, first of all, we'll need a bit of code. The first thing we want to do is prevent the video from replaying by itself anyway. And for most of you, you've probably noticed that when you create a Flash export, when the video is done, it goes all the way back to the beginning and starts playing all over again. Now, if we put a replay button at the end of that, it'd be kind of ineffectual. So the first thing we're going to do is go up here to the window menu, and we're going to open up the window for code snippets. Now, in code snippets, there is a lot of useful code that with a simple double click will apply it directly to your animations, objects, audio, just about anything. And these are going to come in extremely handy for this purpose of creating a button. But first, we want to create a stop code, meaning that when the animation reaches the end, it stops, therefore making a replay button quite beneficial. So that falls under timeline navigation code. In fact, all the code that we're going to do for this course and this video is going to fall under this category. So it's the second one down. If I open it up, the first option is stop at this frame. And if you hover over it, you can see that there's a little bit of explanation as to what these little code snippets do. So this one says stops the playhead from advancing to the next frame in the timeline. And that's exactly what we want. So in order to apply this code, first of all, we need to have our scrubber on our timeline all the way to the end. So at the very end, which happens to be at frame 06, actually it doesn't have to be, it could be anywhere on your timeline and it will stop it from that point on. But for our case, we want to stop the animation at the very end, which is frame 406, particularly in my example. Also, I want to make sure that I'm in the end scene. I don't want to stop it right after Sally walks by and no one gets to see the mask that we created. So make sure that we're working in the proper scene and we're at the very end of the scene. Now I'm going to go to this option, stop at this frame, and double click. Now, two things will happen. First, you'll see an actions menu has opened. The action menu is the actual place where code is applied. And we can see right here that this is the actual code right down here at the bottom. It says stop, and we have some symbols here. And then above it, we have a little bit of information and directions of how to actually use this one. This one doesn't have too much as form as directions, but it does tell you what it's doing. So it says, stop at this frame. The Flash timeline will stop/pause at the frame where you inserted this code. Can also be used to pause the timeline for movie clips. Now, if you remember, Sally's walk cycle was made as a movie clip. If we were to go into the Sally symbol and create a stop code in her animation, instead of continually looping and creating a walk cycle, Sally would make about 2 steps and then stop. So maybe that might illuminate a little bit of what you can do with this code. You can stop movie clips. Maybe if you have something like explosions or flashes of light that you don't want to actually keep playing, this stop animation might be good for a one-time play. Anyway, this code is all we need, and this description isn't necessary. You don't have to delete it. I'm going to delete mine just because I like to run a clean ship. So now we have this action. The next thing I want that happen is a new layer has been created on the end scene, and it's called action. And right here you can see these keyframes, and this keyframe looks like a blank keyframe with the letter A right above it. And if I click on it, there's very few properties. All it is a placeholder for the action script that we just placed. So now when this animation is exported into a SWF, it stops at the very end. Let's examine that.
Mes Nils montants, mais oui, madame, c'est là que j'ai laissé mon cœur. C'est là que je viens retrouver mon âme, toute ma flamme, tout mon bonheur. Quand je revois ma petite église,
I've extended the song out so that we can have the option of actually choosing to replay this. And see, it doesn't replay because we have the stop code in there. So now the next step will be to create the actual button. So there's two ways of going about making a button. A, you can make a button out of anything. You could be as creative as you want. You can create multiple shapes. You could create an image. You can have 30 layers. It really doesn't matter, as long as when turning it into a symbol, you click button. But for this, let's just go ahead and make a very simple button. Now, first thing we need to do is actually give it a layer and a place where we want the button to show up. So if we go and scrub over here, so let's say the button shows up shortly after Finn shows up, and so shortly after this shows up, let's say the button shows up. So right around here, I'll use F7 to create a blank keyframe, and now I'm going to just make a generic shape. For this one, I'll make a circle. A rectangle, and I'll make it with a nice bright color to offset this black background. So now I have this very generic shape, and we will call it, well, first let's make it a symbol. So using the hotkey F8, I'm going to title it button. And under type, instead of movie clip or graphic, there's an option right in the middle called button. And I'll click OK. So now we have created a button symbol. And one thing I need you to do over here in the properties is give it an instant name, meaning that whenever we apply some code to this, the code knows exactly what we're talking about. So we can just call it replay. And let's go ahead and give it some features. So if I double click the button, just like any other symbol where you can double click it and go into its layers and make it as interesting as you desire, you'll notice though this is a little bit different than what you've seen before in the previous versions of these videos. Over here in layers, instead of having an unlimited timeline, you're actually kind of limited to 4 frames. And think of this as like any sort of rollover button that you've seen on the internet, where if you hover over something, maybe it darkens or gets brighter, and when you click it, maybe it gets smaller. And then we have the hit. The hit is actually exactly when you hit the button. And sometimes it happens so fast that if you create an attribute change, you might not even witness it, because as soon as you click it, it's going to take effect or jump to a new frame or do something. But maybe putting a sound in that frame might actually be helpful. Anyway, let's sort of ignore the hit for right now and go over the over and the down. So right now, up means nothing's happening to it. Over, I'm going to F6, copy the frame, because I don't want to create a new frame and have it jump to it. I want to use the same frame to make edits. And then I'm actually going to copy down by using F6. So they're all actually the same. So now I can go onto this keyframe and say, when I hover over it, I actually want it to be a different color. And maybe I want it to be a little bit bigger. And then when I go to the down, maybe I want it to be a lighter color and to be a little bit smaller. And we'll call that good for right now. So now I have this button, and let's go ahead and export the video one more time. And mute it a little bit so we can talk to you. So we get to watch this wonderful animation one more time, and I can show you the functionality of this button. While it won't really do anything because we haven't applied any code to it, you'll see what those keyframes that we have just edited will do. So here's our button, and if I hover over it, you can see that it now has rollover capabilities, and when I click it, so this is actually how a button works. So now let's give it some code, so whenever I click it, it actually does something. So first of all, actually, let's give it a little bit of animation, because right now when it just pops up, it doesn't look like it really fits in with everything. So I can say that, give it some time on the timeline. So F6, we'll go back to this beginning, and I'll click it, and I'll go to color effect, and choose alpha, and I remembered a previous selection where I had the alpha to 0. That's exactly what I want. And I'll come over here, right click, and create classic tween. So now I have this button that will fade in. And now that I've done that, I'm going to make sure the frame is selected, but also I'm going to make sure that I'm using the selection tool and that my symbol is selected. The replay button symbol is selected. And this time I'm going to click another option in the code snippets. Click to go to scene and play. And that's pretty specific and pretty basic, but it says clicking the object plays the movie from the specified scene and frame, which is exactly what we want in a replay button. We want it to go to the intro scene, and we want it to start playing at frame 1. So I'm going to double click it. And if you try this and nothing happens, or it gives you an error, it might be because your object itself is not selected. So that's very important to make sure that your object is selected. Your symbol, your button is selected. And here we have some instructions. We have a little bit information on what this code does and some instructions. So let's go over those. First of all, it says click to go to scene and play. Clicking on the specified symbol instant plays the movie from the specified scene and frame, which is exactly what we want. So here's our instructions. First, replace scene 3 with the name of the scene you would like to play. Well, we have 3 scenes, and we want it to go to the very first scene. So we wanted to go to scene 1. But notice that I have changed the name of my scene, and you may have too. So the name of the scene has to be titled exactly as what you have it titled over here in your scene menu. So mine is titled Intro with a capital I, which is important. So I will replace scene 3 with Intro, keeping track of that capital I. And I wanted to go to frame 1, and that's number 2. Replace 1 with the frame number you would like the movie to play from in the specified scene, which is frame 1. So with that code in place, I'm going to get rid of that information, click out of Actions. I now have this replay button. So let's export this video one more time.
Ménilmontant, mais oui, madame, c'est là que j'ai laissé mon cœur. C'est là que je viens retrouver mon âme, toute ma flamme, tout mon bonheur. Quand je revois
And
ma petite
button will
église,
fade in.
où
Nice.
le mariage allait
All the
gaiement.
code seems to work.
Quand je
And now when I
revois
click it,
ma vieille
oh, like magic. So there you go.
Mais
That's how
oui,
you create
madame,
a replay button.
c'est là que j'ai
There's going to be a follow-up
laissé
video on how to
mon
use
cœur.
stock photos and
C'est là
sounds
que je viens
in Flash if you're
retrouver
interested. It's
mon
not
âme,
necessary, but if you're interested in using
ma
some
flamme,
stock photo that
mon bonheur.
Flash will supply and stock cool buttons to really offset your animation, there'll be another video. But that's kind of the nuts and bolts version of creating a replay button and a little introduction into code through code snippets. This will finish off your Flash animation, and you should be looking pretty good by now. Thank you, and like I said, check out the next video if you're interested on giving a little bit more in way of bells and whistles.